all that money that people invested, they said goodbye to, because it was worth exactly zero.
I'm here in my garage. Oh no, wait, that's not how Tai Lopez says it anymore. I'm scared in my garage. The SEC just filed a $112 million lawsuit against me. That's right, guys. The SEC filed a $112 million lawsuit accusing Tai Lopez of running a massive 9-figure Ponzi scheme. This dates back to his Retail Ecommerce Ventures that he founded in 2019 along with Alex Mayer, the co-founder of Zeusk. Now, if you're not familiar with Rev, let me give you a little bit of background about that. I also have another video on my channel talking about this. If you want to check it out, it's a good video. But the idea was that they were going to create Rev, Retail Ecommerce Ventures, and it was going to acquire brands that were distressed and going bankrupt. We're talking RadioShack, Pier, Dress Barn, Models, brands that are dying, and revive them as online-only brands. Does this idea make a lot of sense? It depends who you ask. It has some merit. You're taking a brand that exists, but I mean, obviously it's going bankrupt. It doesn't take a genius to know you don't want to jump on a bankruptcy train. It's like jumping in a car that's on fire. Then again, Lopez has no real experience running a major business like this, so what do you expect? To finance these acquisitions, Lopez and Mayer worked with Maya Birkenrode, who is conveniently Tai Lopez's cousin, and appointed her as Rev's COO, Chief Operating Officer. They attracted hundreds of investors across the US, ultimately raising over $112 million between April 2020 and November 2022. Investors were enticed by Rev's flashy marketing and promises. The co-founders ran ads boasting of the past successes, such as Alex Mayer's sell of Zeusk, which was a massive hit, and Tai Lopez's very famous internet personality. I don't see how that ties into a business venture like this at all, but he's not nobody, let's put it like that. But what really caught the investors' attention was the massive returns promised to the backers. One promotional pitch promised that for a $300,000 investment, it would yield a $60,000 per year return immediately. That's 20%. That's a very high, unusual figure that you just wouldn't see in a legitimate venture. These investments were structured either as unsecured notes, which is debt, promising up to 25% annual interest, or as equity stakes with monthly dividends up to 2% per month. These terms were extraordinarily generous, and Lopez touted Rev's approach as being one of the best strategies you can invest in. To any legitimate investor, you should definitely see someone without a ton of proven experience in the business world, massive promises right out of the gate. That screams red flags, but the truth is, there's always going to be people that springs the traps on the offshoot that this actually is legit. If it works, yeah, that's a massive gain. You're going to blow up very rich with this. But more times than not, it's something shady going on. From the jump, Tai Lopez touted how Rev was doing amazing. The profits were coming in and they were really on the right track. However, a lot of industry observers noticed a lot of signs of struggle from the beginning. Some of Rev's efforts to revive brands drew attentions for the wrong reason. For example, RadioShack's new bizarre social media post. They post crude R-rated jokes and gained notoriety, sure, but it did little to generate into profitable sales. And by 2022, rumors were swirling that Rev was in financial trouble and might face bankruptcy. A completely different image than what Tai Lopez is presenting to investors and to the public. On September 25, 2025, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, announced it filed a civil enforcement action charging Tai Lopez, Alex Mayer, and Maya Birkenrode with securities fraud for their conduct at Rev. According to the SEC, from 2020 to 2022, the defendants raised money through 8 portfolio companies under Rev, each tied to a retail brand. For example, one portfolio company for Pier, one for RadioShack, one for Models, and then they sold those high-yield notes and equity to investors to raise money. The core of the SEC's allegations is that Rev's principals lied to investors about almost every aspect of the business in order to obtain funds. Here's some of the main misrepresentations and deceptive practices outlined in that SEC complaint. Number 1, false portrayal of success. Lopez and Mayer painted a rosy picture of Rev's brands, claiming that their retail companies were on fire and that cash flow is strong. In promotional videos and webinars, Lopez touted Rev's strategy as a surefire winner, implying that the acquisitions were thriving. But in reality, none of the brands ever turned a profit. Some had revenues, but no profits to support the promised investor returns, let alone even getting their money back. So the glowing description of Rev was deceptive from day one. Number 2 is the promise of safe, dedicated use of funds. Investors were told when they funded a specific brand, for example, putting money into Pier 1's entity, those dollars would be used only for that brand, which gives the investor some flexibility to invest in a brand they might feel more confident in. Maybe you think Pier 1's going to do well, you think Models is going to crash, so you want to get in on Pier 1, not Models, which honestly is a good strategy all around the board. And Lopez and Mayer assured investors that each portfolio company was financially financially solid, and quote, Rev and the Retail Ecommerce Ventures have never failed to pay a single investor. The SEC says Rev's finances were a shell game. The founders shifted money between the brand entities without disclosure. At least $5.9 million in investor funds were transferred from one portfolio to another to plug holes, despite written and oral promises that the funds wouldn't be commingled. So you might have a lot of investors in Dress Barn, but if RadioShack is struggling, they're going to take money and plug RadioShack to make it all look great, going directly against what they said they wouldn't do. Now this is where it gets interesting. The Ponzi-like payments. Because the businesses were not actually profitable, Rev could not legitimately pay investors the hefty interest and dividends it promised. The SEC alleges that Lopez and Mayer resorted to paying earlier investors with money from new investors. That is the definition of a Ponzi scheme. These payments maintain the illusion that the early investments were yielding steady returns, leading more people to invest in Rev's high promises. The SEC complains that not only did they use investors' cash, but Lopez and Mayer tapped external loans and merchant cash advances to meet payment obligations, essentially doing anything they can to scramble and raise funds to avoid defaulting on these promises. Point 4. The misuse and misappropriation of funds. Beyond the Ponzi-like payments, the SEC claims that Lopez and Mayer siphoned off investor money for themselves. Wow, who could have imagined that Tai Lopez took money for himself? You mean the Lamborghini he has isn't his? It didn't come from his hard work every day? Wow, who would have thought that, right? Now, the SEC hasn't detailed all the expenditures yet, but former employees reported that Rev's founders, Mayer and Lopez, spent lavishly, including chartering private jets and flying around the country, even as their company struggled, using investor money to bankroll their luxury lifestyle. Collectively, hold on. I want to tell you about this other one because this is crazy. The fake credentials of management. The SEC said that Rev's deception extended even to the team biographies. They couldn't even be honest about who they are. Lopez and Mayer misrepresented the experience of Maya Birkenrode, Rev's chief operating officer, to build investor confidence. In investor materials and on Rev's website, they claimed Birkenrode had over 10 years of experience managing multi-million-dollar companies. But in reality, this is what she did. She was a substitute preschool teacher. She worked as a radio station promoter, and she was Tai Lopez's personal assistant. She hasn't done anything even with any money, let alone $100 million. She babysits toddlers. That's insane. Collectively, these actions mean that Rev's fundraising was built on fraudulent pretenses, and investors were sold on a vision of revitalized brands and solid returns, but that vision was a lie. It wasn't very long till Rev's financials were under severe strain, yet the company owed a steady stream of interest and dividend payments to investors. By the end of 2022, the strain became too much, and Rev couldn't meet its obligations. They defaulted on its promises to investors and collapsed. Once Rev ran out of money to shuffle around, the truth came out. The creditors quickly seized control of the retail brand assets when Rev defaulted, and those brands were sold off to a new entity called Omni Retail Enterprises LLC. This was a collective from many of the investors in Rev coming together and saying, we are going to try to still do this and get our money back. Imagine someone being so bad at running a business. You have investors who just want to be passive. They all come together and say, screw it, we'll do it ourselves. You get the heck out of here. That's exactly what they did, creating Omni Enterprises LLC to kick Mayer, Lopez, and Birkenrode out of the business. Still, it's unlikely this will ever yield even their money back, given that this idea simply isn't going to work. Also, the negative attention, I think, has permanently stained these brands that were already dead anyway. But the settlement between Rev and Omni Retail Enterprises LLC did seem to be the end of that. However, the SEC's charges are independent of that private settlement. The SEC seeks to hold Lopez, Mayer, and Birkenrode accountable for securities law violations, regardless of any deals made with investors. There's been numerous former employees who came forward as whistleblowers, contacting regulators in 2023, saying that we have been trying to get someone to expose Tai Lopez and his gang of fraudsters for a long time, one employee told the press. Another former executive who worked in Rev, he said, quote, I felt like I'd be compromising myself to continue to work there. I've never worked for a company promising to pay investors 20% returns while the founders were chartering jets all over the country. These whistleblower accounts show that just how bad it was, even inside the company, they knew something was very, very, very wrong. For the investors, the fallout has been terrible. Approximately $112 million was raised in total through the fraudulent offerings. The SEC's lawsuit is seeking disgorgement, which means payment of ill-gotten gains, and potential civil penalties. In addition, the SEC is requesting the court to bar Lopez, Mayer, and Birkenrode from ever serving as officers in any company in the future, public or private, in a way to hopefully keep them from doing this again. But it's worth noting this case is civil, not a criminal indictment. However, if found liable, which they almost certainly will be, the SEC could refer this case to the Department of Justice, the DOJ, for criminal investigation if evidence of willful fraud is strong. Now, given that you're chartering planes and flying around the country while your business is collapsing, that seems pretty willful to me. If the DOJ agrees, they can put criminal charges on all three of these individuals, and Tai Lopez could be facing up to 20 years in federal prison for this crime. But we're not there yet. In my personal opinion, I think we're going to get there. I seriously do. And I try to be very conservative when I say, what I think. I actually think they will file these charges because this is this is 9 figures. $112 million is a substantial amount. Lopez, Mayer, and Birkenroad have all remained quiet about these accusations, not commenting nor denying them to the press. Lopez posted a cryptic message on Twitter saying, "Never doom. No matter how horrible the situation, don't ever think you're doomed. Unless you're all dead. All defeat is psychological." No, you're about to get defeated right here, big dog. I can't stand when people say stuff like this. Oh, like, it doesn't matter. It's all your mindset. No, like, you are literally right here. Your life is collapsing. You are a steak that's been on the grill for 2 hours. You are just roasted, dry, throw you in the trash. You are out of here. And this will actually be a very strong nail in the coffin of Tai Lopez's entire career because everything he does hinges around his public perception and his ability to convince people that he's good at doing whatever he's trying to sell that day. Because Tai, he likes to do whatever's popular. Well, securities violations and being accused of running a Ponzi scheme while your own employees are acknowledging you're taking private chartered jets. Nobody's going to trust that. I think, number one, they will go as hard as they can on this to get justice for the people that were defrauded. Number two, I think they're going to use Tai Lopez as a poster boy. There's been this trend now of influencers liking to go and do these rug pulls, these operations, maybe not full Ponzi schemes, but fraud operations like this to just get quick money. I think they will use this to their advantage and nail Tai Lopez and say, look, this is what happens when you do this crap. Try it. You're going to be right here. I would not be surprised at all if Tai Lopez ends up in federal prison. Do you think Tai Lopez is going to federal prison, or do you think he's going to be able to somehow sneak his way out of it and continue living in his garage with all of his books? Let me know down below, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next week.